Hey, this is LOA Today, the Law of Attraction show. Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and Joel Elston here. Joel, how you doing? Hope things are going well for you.
Walt, it's great to be here. Things are amazing in my life.
Amazing is one of our favorite words, so that's a good one. So anyway, speaking of amazing, this has been an amazing time of year, and it has been a troubling time recently in the news, particularly with the latest shootings in San Bernardino and all the fears that are associated with that. And as usual, of course, that's what news is all about. News is all about pointing out to us the exceptional negative stuff so that we're always focused on it. So, Joel, you and I thought we'd talk about the other side of that coin, the side of the coin that doesn't get any attention, and it's kind of tragic. I mean, I think we'll both agree it's tragic that we as a society tend to focus so much on the negative, particularly through the media. But also, it's an opportunity to recognize that there's a lot of good stuff going on at the same time that these horrific events happen, and we get to choose what it is we're going to focus on.
Well, the concept that you speak of is something that I work in my practice with my clients, helping to see all types of the great that's going on in our lives, despite amongst the devastation. And last week when these events happened, this shooting in California, the very next day, of course, all the news networks had anchors there, and they were focused constantly on there's breaking news stories that really weren't breaking news stories. They were just saying, we still don't know anything new, but however, we're telling you again from a different angle what a horrible event this was, and they're showing all this trauma, and you find yourself being drawn into that, wanting to know all of the information, and that sort of becomes what we believe is going on around us. Now,
yeah.
I'm on the other coast, and I'm certainly, as you said, we certainly mourn the lives of those lost, and what a horrible waste of energy and life that doesn't need to be taking place. But it was the other side of the country, and with the world tuning in, that becomes the perspective that we're filtering everything through. And I pointed out, actually with several of my clients, I was having a conversation that the very next morning following these shootings, in North Carolina, there was an adoption taking place between the couple that were adopting two twin boys. They are a retired couple. They're 58 years old. He's a doctor, and she's 57. And he'd been retired. And 10 years ago, in an unbelievable event, they lost their child in a car wreck. And their world was devastated. Well, the two twin boys that they were adopting 2 years ago lost their parents in a car wreck and had no immediate relatives that were able to take them. So through devastation and tragedy, this incredible turn of events where they came together and this new family was formed the next day, or next day after the shooting. The reason for me pointing that out was that was an amazing event that really touches at the core of all of our listeners, but everybody that will hear such a thing, you can feel what love that would be, and sort of not that would ever replace our loved ones or their loved ones, but it would build a new family that can move forward, dealing on the destruction of their past lives, building on the destruction of their past lives, and with that,
and not just that, getting past the destruction.
Right, getting past the destruction. So it's such a positive story. Now, the only reason I happen to know that story is I work diligently finding kids homes that need homes. I've adopted two boys myself, as you know, and I am in tune with the adoption world, so I knew that was going on. That did not make the newspaper. There wasn't any story going on about that. That's a very positive story. Mm-hmm. And as I was telling my clients about it, and when you hear about that, and that this is National Adoption Month, so there's a lot of adoptions taking place, and each one has a story similar to that behind it, because an adoption does represent the start of a new family, but it also signals the final conclusion of another family. Mm-hmm. That other family's coming to an end, and so we look at the positive in that aspect, that a new family has been born. And so it's so easy. And I find myself, even as much of a believer as I am in practicing the law of attraction and not falling into the negative mindset, but I see myself when I watch those news stories, I believe on some level that I quickly get out of that that's the real world. And in reality, that's not the real world. That's a small portion of our world, and again, very tragic, but it gets so much play. Last weekend, and none of these are good statistics, but on our highways across the country, a busy travel weekend, there were many people killed in automobile accidents, much more than actually were killed in the shooting last week.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't make the shooting right. I'm not trying to make that correlation, but I am trying to point out our focus is what we're talking about here. The idea that it draws ratings for the news, so we're going to send all of our resources to talk about that. And then, of course, all of our presidential candidates are weighing in on it, and they all have the predictable responses from their predictable parties and their stances. And it drives a feature that they're using that for their agendas. So that becomes like what everybody's talking about and focusing on. And that, in a sense, last week became our reality.
Oh, yeah. And it's not an uncommon event. It actually happens a lot more often than most of us are willing to admit to, or at the very least, that it happens more often than most of us are willing to realize.
Yes.
And I'll point to something that is another extremely painful event that I think illustrates very nicely what we're talking about here, about the dangers involved in focusing on it. And that would be the events of 9/11. Now, 9/11 happened 14 years ago. There are many people to this day for whom those events are so traumatic that all they have to do is see video of the towers falling and they practically go into a state. The emotional connection there is so powerful. And when you understand that goes well beyond what the media tell us, you begin to realize it isn't just the media. The media are basically feeding what it is the populace are demanding. And the populace has long shown a preference for distasteful events, in many cases ugly, evil events, wanting to know more, wanting to see more, wanting to dwell on it more. And I think that it's not enough to talk about the negative side of the media. We need to talk about the negative side of why it is people focus on this stuff. Because until we do that, I don't think we're going to be able to discharge that negativity. I mean, you tell me, you're a therapist, you know better than I do, but that's my take on it.
Well, and that's exactly the point of where we're hoping at some point the concept of the law of attraction and how to use it properly will. You just summed it up so nicely of what happens. There's a term that you'll often hear. I don't know if you've ever had a moment of euphoric recall where you'll remember an incredible event, a great event that happened. It could be something. It might be triggered by a smell. You might say, "Boy, I remember when I was a child that smelled like Coney Island," or whatever your
right.
event would be, and you have a great memory attached to that. Well, very much the same way, traumas. There's traumatic recall as well, and traumatic recall it becomes a reality that we you see a picture, you look back, and that draws us to that point of the negativity. And just like with anything, the law of attraction, we've probably said this every week that we co-hosted, the law of attraction does not have an opinion. It has no emotion. It's not about good or bad. It just feeds or picks up on what we're vibrating. And when we're in charge of what we're vibrating, but we have forgotten that, and a lot of times because it's fed to us through the media, that this is such a horrible event, then that's what we start to believe. But on September 11th. Now it's great you brought that up. What a horrible event, and I can envision that plane hitting the building. I can see it falling. But what I have conditioned my mind to think about is there's a gentleman named Michael Benefonte. He and a coworker carried a woman in a wheelchair 68 floors to safety right before the building collapsed.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's a heroic story. He was overweight, out of shape, middle-aged man that carried a woman, him and a coworker, 68 floors to safety. There's another gentleman, an equity trader. His last name was Crowther. He put on his red bandana that he wore in college.
Mm-hmm.
He went in and out of the building and saved 12 lives. He went into the building one more time and it collapsed, and he died a hero.
Mm.
Now, those are the stories that when I think of September 11th, I think of what it did for us as humans. It brought us together. I look at the heroes that were revealed that day. Now, that's me conditioning my mind. By no means am I ever looking at September 11th being a great thing, but I tend to choose to look at the heroes that were revealed that day, and that's sort of using the law of attraction. I would love to think that I would be one of those heroes that would stand up and take that step and go help other people. So when I reflect, that's what I've conditioned my mind to do. When others reflect, they have conditioned to be so negative about that it brings back the traumatic. They almost relive it in a traumatic event, taking them back to there. And that is the key to the law of attraction has always been understanding that looking at any event, we are in control of our perspective of that event, and it's up to us to put the positive perspective toward that event, no matter what the event. There's going to be a side to it that there's a positive or there's something going to be revealed from any loss or any devastating or any traumatic event.
Oh, yeah. I can think of one from that particular event. I guess it's the thing I conditioned my mind with, although I didn't necessarily do it consciously. But on any given work day, when the Twin Towers still stood, 15,000 people worked in the Twin Towers. That was normal. On a really busy day, it might be 20,000. On the day of 9/11 and the 9/11 attacks, 3,000 people died. That means 12,000 people escaped. Now, I don't mean that they all ran out of the building. I mean that for whatever reason, somewhere around 1/2 to 2/3 of them weren't even there that day. And that to me is astonishingly good. It's amazingly good. I mean, I don't know what to point to on that. I think it depends a lot on what your personal beliefs are. My own personal beliefs are they were guided away. But
absolutely,
regardless of whether you believe that or not, the point is somehow they weren't there. That's tremendously fantastic news.
Well, and that's how I look at that day, that the upwards of, we didn't know what was happening that day.
Right.
And there could have been 25 or 30,000 people dead. In fact, there were reports, and I find this atrocious now that I look at it in retrospect, that they've ordered 10,000 body bags. I remember them saying that on TV, and I'm like, why would you, even back then, I'm like, why would you say how many body bags are that? It was all pure speculation and rumor at that point.
Right.
The idea that when we look at it, there are countless stories, and in fact, somebody should write a book about this. There were countless stories of people who one man was so frustrated because he took his normal route into the World Trade Center would be he would drive his car to the train station, take the train station into Manhattan. And he described this ridiculous chain of events. His car wouldn't start, and by the time he went through the 9 things that kept him from making it to the building, he was just getting into the town, into Midtown, Lower Manhattan, when the plane hit.
Mm-hmm.
If he would have been on time, his floor, I believe, was 100. I don't know, way up there, and he would have certainly been killed. And his perspective, and he talks about his perspective changing, it went from what a horrible warning to him literally getting on his knees. And he was an atheist before this, he said, and thanking God for having those events stop him from showing up to work at that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And there are countless people saying the exact same thing. You hear that about train wrecks where people didn't make it on the train. You hear all these other things happen. And when you tend to use the positive and use, look at the people that were saved. And it's horrible those 3,000 people lost their lives. It certainly is.
Certainly.
But the 30,000 could have been dead.
Yeah. Yeah, it could have been much, much worse than it was.
It's Monday morning at 9 o'clock.
Tuesday,
that's
actually.
When,
I remember very vividly. It was a Tuesday.
Tuesday, that's right. Tuesday, yeah, it was Tuesday. That's right. It was busy, right in the middle of a work week. Everybody's back from vacation. School started back,
and it was a gorgeous day. I mean, it was an absolutely brilliant day.
I remember I was actually in Florida at the time, and it was just absolutely. When you were watching the TV, you could see it was that brisk, beautiful September morning in New York City, and all of that happened. So our perspective of that day, a lot has to do with how we choose to look at it. Because that day there was a lot of things that happened, and a lot of them were bad, and a lot of them were amazing. And it's which one. So when I think September 11th, I think heroes. That's the first word that comes to my mind. I think heroes.
Well, I would say we've been conditioned to experience that too. I mean, certainly, I mean, we're going to blame the media for bringing all the bad news to us. I think we should point out the media also has helped condition us to this idea of heroes, because they certainly played that up a lot.
And I'm so glad they do. And I would love to get to a point where when we're reporting news and when the networks are doing that, if we could become more equitable in both sides of the story, and September 11th they did a good job with it, especially in the weeks following as they told these stories. And as we move forward with news reporting and say, here's some amazing things that are going on, and if we can look at the people that survived, look at the people that have survived or save other people's lives. The young lady that I forget her name, but she was at the Sandy Hook shooting. She was a school teacher, and she protected her students, and she lost her life protecting her students. It's tragic that she did that all that happened, but no matter what happened, here's this young, beautiful lady who went down in history as a great hero protecting her children from the bad guys, or the bad guy in that day. And I love the concept of when things happen and where on an individual basis. I have experienced tragedy. I lost my son last August in a horrible car accident, and I focus on the joy he brought to my life. I focus on all the stuff. He makes me smile every day to this day. And the void created by his death could really drive my life every day. But what drives my life every day is the great memories and the great joy he brought to my life. And I'm choosing that perspective. I honor him with that perspective. And I know I'll see him again. And I know you believe that as well, Walt, that we're energy and we'll see each other again. That helps a lot as well. But when you choose to wallow in or get stuck on, and that's when the law of attraction has such negative effects, just huge consequences on the negative side when we get stuck in that way of thinking.
Very much so. I think probably the best part is that you made a deliberate choice about what you were going to take away from a horrific event in your own life. And to this day, that choice has enabled you to not only move forward, but to have a happy life. Despite tragedy, you have a happy life. That's not the experience that most people have, but it's the experience they could have.
Well, and I think that applies so many areas. When we look at what happens, the events that happen in our lives, our response to them becomes so important. As I often say, what happens is almost always out of our control. Our response to them continues to always be in our control. And when you grasp that, when people lose jobs, the most successful people that I know that have the most money and are happiest in their life at the same time are people that lost their job, they were scared to death, and that drove them to do something else, and they did what was making them they took a job that made them happy, they built companies, they have become incredibly successful, again building off of the negative. And it's people that are able to do that tend to have the best outcomes. When we accept the role of victimhood, it's something that when we view like, I'm a victim of all this, woe is me, we get stuck in that way of thinking, and more things tend to happen to us, which is basically the definition of the law of attraction. We are inviting that same thing when we're living. Self-pity is a drug in my mind. It is a negative drug that is probably, as much as gratitude is the most effective way to use the positive side of the law of attraction, I believe self-pity is the polar opposite. It is the most effective way to draw the negative side of the law of attraction. Self-pity is an incredibly selfish mindset that, woe is me, I am suffering alone, I am suffering worse than anyone else, the world is against me, I am cursed. And that mindset, it does have an addictive quality to it. And that's why I said it's like a drug. But to me, it is a catalyst for the negative side of the law of attraction, just as the way gratitude is on the positive side.
You may take issue with this, but I'm actually going to argue that self-pity is not selfish. I'm going to argue that self-pity is disconnection of self, and that, by definition, that can't be selfish anymore because you're basically taking yourself out of it.
Yes, and there certainly is a component of that, and more of the selfish concept that I was speaking about is it is a refusal to accept there's anything but you, but your point of disconnecting from that is well taken. I mean, because it does have a self-pity is it really throws us away from the source. Self-pity pulls us away from what, I think self-pity is the opposite of whatever you believe, God, or if you believe in any of that stuff. Self-pity is probably, my assumptions, let's say there is a God of some sort that's looking down. I think self-pity is probably the most disgusting mindset that a higher power could see us have, because it would be such a distasteful thing. And for me, in my addiction year, self-pity was so it's the thing I'm ashamed of most during my addictive years.
Yeah. The other thing that occurs to me, whenever you have a conversation with anybody about the law of attraction and you're talking about negative events, inevitably somebody makes the connection and says, well, how can you claim that, for instance, the victims of the San Bernardino shootings attracted that? They were innocent victims. How could you possibly argue that? That's obscene to argue that. Or to say that the victims of 9/11 attracted the attacks. Or to say that the victims of Sandy Hook, a bunch of children, attracted attacks. And this is probably the number one reason people use to reject the concept of the law of attraction. So I think we should take a moment to address that. I'll let you give your own answer. My answer is, I think they actually did attract it in ways that we'll never know about. Because, first of all, we've already acknowledged just how much negative thought goes on in society. Well, why should we assume that victims of a tragedy didn't have negative thought patterns going on? But even more importantly than that, it isn't a question of what they attracted. The more important question is, can we attract what we truly want, the positive side? We could spend all of our time focusing on how individuals attract negatively and just basically make ourselves extremely depressed and extremely dysfunctional in the process. Or we could say, you know what, that side exists, but I'm not going to focus there. I don't want to go over to the dark side of the Force. I want to stay on the light side of the Force with Luke Skywalker, because that's the better place to be.
Well, and to me, I used to have the same thoughts, especially when it came to children who were abused or neglected, and I would, that's where I always had the hardest time. What did they do to attract that? And one of and that argument has always been, it probably was the last hurdle that I had to get over before I could buy into this whole concept all the way. There's a difference between what we attract and blame. We're automatically assuming that if I say these people in California unintentionally through negative thinking or what have you, I've attracted a bunch of tragedy in my life over the years of my addictive behavior. I went to jail. I lost everything. I've eaten out of a trash can. I've been homeless. I've had my head beat in with a 2x4. I attracted all of that, Walt, every bit of it. I didn't know I was attracting it at the time.
Yeah, it's not like you volunteer and say, hey, I want to have this happen to me.
Exactly. So I think people get upset when we say that people attract things and somehow equate that as us saying they're at fault for things. We're not blaming these victims. When we're living in that negative mindset, we are attracting all the things that are happening in our lives at this point. And that becomes such a big step for us to, number one, accept, and then secondarily, then go through with the process of saying, okay, the law of attraction it's very consistent. Just like gravity is very consistent, the law of attraction is very consistent. It isn't stuck on the emotional issue of a child died. Mm-hmm. The child is. It doesn't go there. So I am by no means blaming those precious children of Sandy Hook. I'm not blaming the victims of 9/11. I'm not blaming any of these recent events on the people that are there. Attracting it is not blame. We all attract things. Our country right now is attracting a huge amount of negative thought.
Oh yeah.
We really are. We're in a very negative mindset. You look at the presidential campaign, and it's all based on negative. It's about how we're going to defeat and destroy, and how we're going to continue to. We have to do it this way, and we're stuck in one pattern of thinking. And after 12 years of bombing people, I don't know if bombing more people is the answer.
I'm pretty sure it's not.
yeah. So, it really puts us in this mindset of knowing where the law of attraction works, and again, understanding it doesn't. When someone falls off of somebody's cleaning windows in New York City, the thing falls and they die. They fall to their death. It isn't like that damn gravity. I can't believe the gravity did that.
Right. It's not like we're going to say, I'm not going to believe in gravity anymore because there's no way that a just God would create gravity that would pull people to the ground and kill them.
Exactly. And that's the same concept with the law of attraction. So I'm not blaming gravity for that gentleman falling. I'm blaming him not taking the right safety steps or the faulty equipment. That's where the blame needs to be placed. The idea that what took place leading up to that is, in the attraction of that, is where the mindset is. I should have been, in all my negative mindset, in my horrible addiction years, I always say I'm so grateful that I'm still alive. Because
And you have more reason than most to say that.
Yes, exactly. And one of the things that I could harbor resentment over in life, and I don't. My son TJ, who passed away, had a really difficult time, probably from 16 until 18. He really turned his life around. Uh-huh. And the last year of his life, Walt, he was doing so well. He was working. He was engaged to be married. He had everything going. Now, if he would have lost his life during his real bad time, not that would have been any better, of course, but it would have been, that's how he's sort of behaving.
Mm-hmm. It would have been easier to see the connectivity, the connection to what he was thinking, create a result. The cause and effect would be much more clear.
And yes, but there's also another pattern here that I think we may. The period of time that we're on this planet is not even a blink of an eye in overall concept of time. Mm-hmm. We're energy, and again, I'm speaking from my opinion.
Sure.
I am energy that I believe existed before this life and will exist after this life. Mm-hmm. And so the reality is, I don't know what the plan is anyway. Maybe my plan was only to be here for a little while. Maybe that was the point. Maybe when we finally get to the point where we get to return back to our source, or we go to heaven, or whatever your belief system says, then I think we get a full picture of the overall concept. You can't kill energy. You can kill these vessels that our energy is stored in, but these vessels have a definite time they're going to run out for us. And the idea that the law of attraction certainly takes place on this realm, but I believe it takes place on the next level where our energy is. It's just I think it's much easier to deal with it not in human form, because you can it would seem to make more sense, because so many people say, well, it's not fair because these kids lost their lives, or it's not fair because some of these people that lost their lives. I don't know this to be a fact, but I understand the shootings last week in California were at a place that dealt with disabled or special needs people.
Right, that's right.
So I don't know if some of the people at this point lost were clients. They may have been. And so I can also say, well, how could that be fair that disabled people lost their lives?
Yeah, it seems so unfair, so completely unreasonable.
Exactly. And that's getting back to it. The law of attraction isn't about that. It's not about fairness. There's people that have $3 billion because they believe they have $3 billion. I can say that's not fair, that there's people that have $3 billion and some people can't afford to pay their rent this month.
Mm-hmm.
It's just knowing that there's something out there that does drive this stuff, and stop trying to put an equality or an equation to it, because that isn't the point of it. It is a law that's taking place.
And people don't realize, people tend to think that the word fair is an objective word.
Yes.
They fail to recognize that it's not. It's an emotional, subjective word. It means this is what I consider to be desirable.
Yes.
It is not a definition that means this is objectively desirable from any point of view.
well, and that's such a great point, because we live, where we live is mentally is a standard that has been handed down. Our belief system has been developed through the lives we've lived and what was handed down to us from our parents, and is a combination of things that led to that. What is good and what is bad is simply subjective of what we like. I know people that have a vast amount of wealth that live in tiny houses and drive 10-year-old cars. They don't care about the other stuff.
Which is really interesting when you think about it.
Yeah, they're like, I know people that can barely make their mortgage payment. They're driving 2 Porsches in the house. So
they're not the typical people at the bottom of the totem pole, but they do exist.
Right, and so where I'm going with this is the law of attraction. Again, is an event. It's a law. It doesn't sit there and distinguish between, boy, these poor kids are here, or they attracted this, or they, it doesn't. It has no conscience as far as good or bad or evil, or it brings about what you put out there. And that piece, understanding that piece, helped me a lot, because it isn't that I believe in the law of attraction as a religion. I believe in the law of attraction as a law. It is a tool that is available to us, that it can give you great peace and great joy, or it can also give you total hell on this planet when you understand it.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
The people that are receiving the total hell just don't understand what they're doing. That's why cycles keep happening in families. One of my goals always is to help people break cycles within family units, because the law of attraction continues to drive cycles in families.
And it does so without conscious intent.
Yes, and that's where I think, because people I don't believe in the law of attraction because those poor kids, you're blaming those poor kids for them dying. No, this is not about blame. This is about understanding how mindsets come to pass.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I really want to look at it, if you want to, and again, I don't want to create a lot of turmoil or get anyone upset, but I don't know how many children were at Sandy Hook, but most of them lived.
Yeah. Sandy Hook is actually about 45 minutes to an hour away from where I live right now, and I actually know the town. It's actually not even a town per se. In Connecticut, we have a number of these little towns that aren't actually incorporated towns. They're like little subsections of other towns, and Sandy Hook is a subsection of Newtown, which is an actual incorporated town. I could be wrong, and maybe Sandy Hook is one of the few that actually is incorporated, but I'm pretty sure they're not. But anyway, Sandy Hook Elementary School is, I don't know the exact population, but there's probably over 1,000 kids there, and nowhere near that many died that day. So your point is very well taken. The overwhelming majority of children in that school lived.
And by no means does that help the parents who lost kids to hear that.
Absolutely not. No.
But what the point of our talk is understand when you first hear about the law of attraction, a lot of people think it is a very soft, foo-foo kind of, oh, this is so gentle. The law of attraction is relatively brutal. It's in the sense of it is, again, unwavering in its ability to go what it's doing. It is there, it's existing, it's unchanging, it's putting out what you're putting in. It's picking up what we're putting out, and it's fulfilling what that is. And when we as human beings don't realize that we are putting out the negative stuff and that we're bringing that to ourselves, that's a hard pill to swallow. It really is.
Because that's the ultimate in self-responsibility.
Yes. This really takes it way beyond. It is not your for every instance where I hear, I was brought up in this poor environment, this happened to me, or this happened to me, or this happened to me, and that's why I'm not successful. I can show you 100 people that have taken your situation or worse and have become successful. It's because their perspective was they were going to go do it. When you accept the role and then you live the role, then the law of attraction fulfills the role.
Right.
It has no choice but to do that.
Yep.
And that is when I understood it, because I had a really hard time separating the law of attraction from a religion. I didn't want to believe in a religion that children could manifest their own death. But it isn't about believing in a religion that does that. It's about understanding one of the principles at work in our lives. And when you see people that heal themselves from medical conditions because they were just using their mind, nothing else, and their belief system.
Right, because that's the flip side. That we tend to focus on the negative side, the idea that people can actually decide they're going to die just by what they're thinking about. But there's also the flip side, which is they can choose not only to live, but how they're going to live.
Right.
And what they're going to do with their life, what's going to come into their life, where their life is going to go. They may not even know exactly where they want to go, but all they have to do is get themselves onto that positive wavelength, that positive way of thinking, and all of a sudden all these different opportunities start to pop up. And as those opportunities start to pop up, then they can start making choices like, well, I want one of those, I don't want one of those, but I do want one of those, and I want to experience that, and I don't want to experience that, but I do like that, so I'm going to do that. That's what happens. When you start living in the realm of the law of attraction and how you can actually put the law of attraction on your side by deliberately, consciously choosing what you're going to focus on, all of a sudden all kinds of great things can happen.
Well, and that's the positive side that's where the energy is. When you understand the law of attraction is working, whether you like it or not, and then you tune into it, and then you learn to use it on your behalf. That's when it starts to make sense, and that's when it becomes something that's very palatable, because it does work on all sides. When you have people that believe that they're going to be healed, there's no doubt they're living as if they don't have cancer, even though they've been diagnosed with cancer. I know countless times that I have been contacted by or former clients or just people that have lived life and basically have healed themselves from terminal diseases that had no. Valerie Harper right now, she was diagnosed with a horrible brain cancer a few years ago, and had a few months to live.
Right.
She's very much a practitioner of the law of attraction. Last I heard, she's still working and doing well.
Yep.
And there's no answer for that, because what science or our medical doctors, they're great. They certainly bring a lot of great stuff to the table. But what they haven't been able to do is understand that the mind and the power of the mind has the ability to bring about. The law of attraction makes the mind work. The law of attraction says you have no option but to heal this body. This body needs to be healed because that's the reality we're living in. There is no cancer here. And the body's okay. There's no cancer here, so we just got to get rid of whatever that was, and just move on. And that's how it operates. And and that's where it gets on the edge, where so many people. It is a hard way to start living because it really goes against a lot of old time religious beliefs that we're sort of a victim of certain things.
Oh yeah.
If you
and there's a lot of pushback about that too. A lot of people push back on that basis.
Yes, I have a lot. I'll hear stuff like, "Well, this storm came through." Some of my Southern Baptists, I was brought up Southern Baptist, and I still have many friends that are very good people, and they're Southern Baptists, but they can believe, well, this happened because God was angry with this town.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, I'm not trying to make fun of their religion, but the idea that it happened because a low pressure developed right off the coast of Florida, and it draw that's what happened. And
even more importantly, from my perspective, now again, this is me speaking, not you speaking, but from my perspective, the idea that there is a deity that created all of us that goes around choosing to punish because a town doesn't live in the way that the deity had in mind, that's obnoxious to me.
Well, it is, and it's obviously ridiculous. I mean, first of all, I can't imagine the greatest power in the universe is worried about what a small town in southern Florida is doing or not doing,
As if the entire town acts as one, too. That's the part. I mean, when was the last time you actually got an entire town to do something?
Exactly. But the reality is, here is like the other side of that concept, because growing up in Florida, I grew up with a lot of hurricanes.
Sure.
And the side of what people don't talk about with hurricanes, there's not that many lives lost in hurricanes generally.
No.
A lot of property damage, though.
Yep.
And you hear about that. One of the great boosters of economy is a hurricane.
Because it rebuilds.
They tear down all these buildings. These insurance companies flood a ton of money into the area. All the workers get back to work. There's few things that can get an economy jump-started more than a hurricane wiping out a town.
I'm not sure that's the way I want to jumpstart an economy, but your point's well taken.
Yeah, and that's, again, that's not what I'm suggesting that we're trying to do, but within the concept
the new economic policy for the country, we want more hurricanes.
we need more hurricanes, and that'll help a lot. And that's certainly not what we're saying, but the idea that even from the destruction of a force, when you use the positive perspective to look at, it's going to help rebuild the economy. We didn't want it to happen, but we're going to use it in a positive manner.
Right.
As I said earlier, events out of our control are going to happen every day. Mm-hmm. Our response to them is when the law of attraction comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
There are random events going on that we don't necessarily attract, I believe. You can happen to be in the path of one of these random events. Your response to it is going to be the answer. Lou Ferrigno, the actor who played the Incredible Hulk in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, I've had the privilege of meeting him several times. I'm very much into weightlifting.
Oh,
He's a really good guy. When he was 3 years old, he developed a severe infection in his ear and lost a good percentage of his hearing.
Mm-hmm.
And he developed a speech impediment. And he was bullied horribly. He was this awkward, tall, thin kid, and he was bullied horribly as a child. And so much so, he got tired of being bullied, so he one day started working out.
Right.
He worked out harder than anybody ever worked out in the gym.
Mm-hmm.
And he obviously, that eventually led to him becoming an actor and having several roles and being Mr. Universe and winning several bodybuilding championships.
Right.
And becoming famous.
Yep.
And he says clearly, if I did not have the ear problem, the speech impediment, I would have eventually worked in the mill. He lived in Brooklyn at the time, or whatever he would have had a blue collar job and never would have left his town. He would have just repeated the same thing his family did for years and years and years. But because of that, he now lives in California. Arnold Schwarzenegger is a very good friend. You have all these great things that he's living. He's living this incredible life, and he credits the trouble that he had.
Yeah, and he's not saying that he's glad that he had the trouble. What he's saying is he's glad that he chose to understand that trouble in a much more positive way that led to tremendous positive results.
And that becomes so much more of an important factor to look at. And I think that's where people, I have people that have actually told me that they are offended at the way I talk about my son TJ, and they're like, "Well, you're not mourning him." And I said, "No, I've mourned my son's death. I choose only to allow the joy he brought in my life to affect me on a daily basis." Now,
isn't it interesting how far people will go to defend their negativity?
Yes, and they're like, "Well, you don't, you're not," and I'm not. And me saying this, by the way, Walt, I am by no means am I attacking anyone else in how they choose to grieve.
No,
I'm not. But I can't. I would never do that. I'm saying, for me, if I could trade places with my son right now, I would snap my fingers instantly and have that happen. There was no doubt. I've lived a much longer life. I would much rather him be here. He's not here. I have the option of wallowing in the void created by him gone and being miserable, or remember every day. I have a smiling picture. I'm smiling really big right now. It's on my desk of him right here in front of me right now.
Mm-hmm.
That is the joy. I mean, he had the ability to make me laugh. No matter how mad I was at him, he could make me laugh. And that's what he does on a daily basis. Mm. And I bring that to the table again, because that's the way I choose to do it. That's my reaction to his death. I am horrified that my son died, but my life believes that he was here, he brought joy to my life, and that's what I choose to honor. So that affects my life in a different way. And again, I have had people get very upset with me for sharing that.
I believe you, and in fact, I've run into, we all do, let's be perfectly honest. Everybody has run into people who are like that. They're ubiquitous. They're all over the place. And the thing that strikes me most about them is they express their distaste at things like what you had to say, and that they've expressed things like that to stuff I've had to say. I don't know if they realize how much distaste I have for what they said. Right. Because they're the ones who are insisting we must feel negative. Yeah. You must stay in the negativity. You must stay in the pain. If you haven't suffered enough pain yet, it means it's just because you haven't focused there enough. Yeah. And the more pain, the better. And while we're focusing on that pain, let's remember that none of us are responsible for any of it, that in fact all this happens because the devil is among us. And it's the devil who makes these things happen. It's not us at all. We are powerless. That's disgusting.
Well, and that's the point. Well, when we walk through that victimhood of, I am not responsible for all this, I am a martyr, this is horrible, all these things that lead us in a path of perpetuating the victimhood, to me that is so distasteful. And I see people that live in that, and they never get out of it. They're constantly a victim of what life brings to them. I'm sure you're like me, that we're willing to let them stay there if that's where they really choose they want to stay there. Sure. By all means, we'll respect that choice, but doesn't mean we have to like it. Well, and that's so. I have some very good friends that, and I can't say they're necessarily good friends right now, but they're people in my life.
Well, it's hard to remain friends with somebody like that. Right. How do you maintain a relationship with somebody who insists on feeling miserable all the time?
I have a friend that I've had for years, and she the other day she called, and I almost didn't answer the phone, and I said, okay. and I said, hey, how are you doing? She goes, oh, my pain medication, and she went into a 5-minute dissertation about everything that was wrong.
Yeah.
And she said, how are you doing? I go, things are incredible. I said, the book's selling well, and she's like, oh. She said, I wish I had your life. And I go, but all you have to, I said, let's do it. Let's.
Yeah, your wish is my command.
Yeah, and then you all you have to do is, because I have had incredibly, as you know, I've had some serious consequences in my life, especially through my addictive behavior. But once I turned things around and understand right now I am not a victim of any of this stuff. Right, life is happening. I have an incredible life. I love what I do. I'm vibrating that level where I live in a state of gratitude. I'm sincerely grateful when I wake up in the morning. And that brings more things to be grateful about. She is focused solely on her pain. She said, it must be nice to be pain-free. And I go, I didn't say I was pain-free. I'm a 53-year-old man that does powerlifting. I certainly, if I want to sit here and think about it, I could tell you some pain I have. That's not where my focus is today. And that's the idea that there are people that voluntarily have become comfortable living in this dysfunction. It is frustrating because these are people that I care about. I would love to see them, but they just can't. They can accept they're a victim, a random victim that is stuck because of the world's against them, or they've been given a bad genetic pool. They can accept all that, but they don't want to accept the responsibility that their perspective is in their control.
Yeah, and it's really, really a very sad thing. One of the things that I am reminded of as I think about people who are stuck in that place, because I've been stuck in that place just like you have, is that when you're in that place, the experience, the visceral experience of feeling good is alien. And by alien, I mean you can't imagine it. Right. You can't imagine what that feels like. Literally, you can't imagine it. Literally, you can't make your body and your mind think, what does it feel like to feel good? You know that such a thing exists in an abstract, intellectual way. But in terms of feeling it, you can't reach out and feel it. It's just not there. And that's probably the biggest tragedy, if you will, of being stuck in that mindset, is that those of us who have been there know how, when we're in that place, we cut ourselves off from the very thing we want the most.
And we
can't feel it. We just can't feel it.
Yeah, and that's the paradox, because it's this negative moaning and whining that invites more of the same. And I'm saying that in a non-judgmental way, because I've been champion of self-pity, of moaning and whining in the middle of all my stuff. I was the ultimate victim. So I speak from experience. I'm not speaking of where I'm at. My family I have generations of depression and mental illness and suicide in my family. So I certainly have had all this handed down for me over the years, and I chose to do away with that. A lot of people don't like the responsibility of the implementation of the law of attraction, because at the end of the day, it puts it on our shoulders.
Oh, yeah. Well, one of the hardest things for me very early on was just dealing with the idea that I could actually change my emotion, let alone feel something different. That feeling is within my control. No, it's not. Feeling is what happens to me.
Right.
That's the way I believed. And it's only in the last few years, through a lot of real difficult, at times, application of, by God, somehow I'm going to change the way I'm feeling, that I've actually been able to move the needle. The most amazing thing in my life was seeing the day when, oh my God, I actually moved the needle myself. Yes. It wasn't an event that happened to me. I did it.
You did, and when you're filtering for the positive, or filtering for the motivation, or whatever term you want to use, I love this. I don't think I've used this recently, but this happened several months ago. I was having a day. I work out every day. I have this great life, and I was at the gym one day, and I'd had to get up really early that day to meet a client. And I was sort of tired, and I was halfway considering not working out. Mm. I'm like, what's it going to hurt? I mean, it's probably good to take a day off, and so I was parked up front at the gym, and this lady, she pulls up, great lady, and I very dear friend. She had a horrible accident years ago. She's in the gym every day of her life. She lost her 2 legs and an arm. So she's getting out of her truck, her van, into her wheelchair with her one arm, and I immediately went, really?
Yeah.
And I immediately snapped my mind to, and I'm just like, and you got to know this lady. She will not allow me to help her. I would love to. She doesn't want anybody. She's great. She has a great perspective. But just me seeing her get out of her van, I was like, wow, how could I think I'm too tired to go to the gym? Are you kidding me? and so I can look in my environment and see examples. She's a very positive force in my life. I see her almost every day, and she's very, very much in tune, and she's a very much practitioner of the law of attraction. I want to get her on the show one day to talk to us.
Yeah, that'd be great.
How but she has one arm, and she'll tell you how blessed she is. And we're in control of that, Walt. And when we realize that, just like you're saying, when you moved the needle and you did it by yourself, first of all, it sort of makes us realize, wow, I wish I'd known this years ago or could figure it out years ago. But it
also shakes up the universe. Well, the universe is not what I thought it was.
It wasn't. These words are so hard to comprehend. Your perspective dictates your reality.
It does.
You're in control of your perspective, so you're in total control of your reality. Those words are hard to comprehend until you do what you did when you start moving the needle. And then you get to live in a reality of your creation. It's amazing.
But you're going to have trouble believing this reality. Our hour is up.
that always happens for us.
It's amazing, I tell you. But Joel, it's been a pleasure. This has been great as usual.
It's so good to talk to you, Walt. I look forward to this every week, and I appreciate everyone that's listening. And I look forward to getting together next week. And I don't know what our topic will be, but I'm sure it's going to be great.
Well, we didn't know what our topic was until we started today, and look what we came out of it with. We're not done, and the hour's up. So
Exactly.
That's the way it usually goes. So we'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.